Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for coming. This is Nail Your Website Redesign in 2022 live event. We are all excited to have you. I'm going to be a moderator on this event to make sure everything's on track. My name is Sergey Ross. I am joined today by Aram Malkamov, who's CEO and co-founder of Crowdlinker, Fiona Holler, who's a director of product and design, and Ursula Dobrovolska, who's a MarTech product manager. So Crowdlinker, a few awarded who we are. We are a digital product studio based out of Toronto, Canada. We've built a lot of websites over the last 10 years, at least 30, partnered with companies like Top Hat, FreshBooks, League, Acto, IntroHive, and lots of others. And at this event, we'll talk about dealing with politics of your website redesign, how to make sure you get the right people working on your project, how to keep the project organized, all other tips and tricks, and also we'll make sure that we answer Q&A and questions, for example, like the one that Aaron sent. So to start off, the first question to our amazing panel is, before we talk about the kind of checklists that you need before starting a website, the redesign, right? Like when we say a large scale website redesign, what do we mean by that? Anybody who wants to jump on it?
Yeah, I'll jump on this one. I think small versus large scale often means different things to different people, depending on budget, size of companies, their industry. But when I think about a large scale website development, I tend to lean on the complexity of the project and the risk that you take on with that sort of project. So it could be from a design or a technical perspective, but we tend to ask questions such as, are there high volumes of data and traffic that need to be accounted for? Is there a significant amount of URL redirects required? And if we don't get it right, is the website traffic going to tank? Are there lots of pages, lots of user paths that need to be thought through and tested? Are there integrations with other systems? Is there a lot of custom dev work required? And is there work planned with other third parties that you need to tie your deliverables to? So the complexity of the project will determine your fundamental project cornerstones, which is your time, needs, budget, people required. And so those are the sorts of things that I tend to look at to determine whether or not it's a large or small scale build.
What are some of the mission critical things, let's say a typical CMO or VP of marketing would need to know before launching a website redesign? Ursula, what do you think those are?
I think the most important is that you have a defined goal for what you want this website to achieve. So is it about getting more people to click on signing up for a demo? Is it about getting people to reach out to your sales team? Are you just, reinforcing your brand identity and want to become like a bigger name in the industry? So getting aligned on those goals is really important. Also having a good idea of who is your customer, and then who is your ideal customer? Who are you trying to reach and why? And then in addition to that, knowing who your previous customer was, but from your old site, if you're doing a redesign, having numbers associated with your previous site. So traffic, where was your website ranking in Google searches? And then coming to the table with what your goals are for this new website and if they are achievable or not. Also very important nowadays is making sure you have a clear understanding of who your markets are. If there's a chance you're going to have people signing up for your products that are in Europe, then you have to be GDPR compliant. That's not really negotiable anymore at this point. And just keeping in mind that privacy nowadays is mission critical, and it's going to continue to become more and more important. And then finally is who at your company is going to be a stakeholder on this project. You want to define your stakeholders early on in the process, because the last thing you want is having someone jump on to the project halfway through, and then you've missed their critical insights about how the website should be structured.
Just to add to that, great points, Ursula. Thank you. I was just going to say, with those stakeholders, I like to refer them as like members of a steering committee. So make sure you try to set one up before you even start any project. Understand what is everybody's role and responsibility going to be in that steering committee. in some of the engagements we've had, there's always a digital marketing person who's responsible for everything from SEO and paid advertising that they're currently doing that company. There is a designer that is proficient of the current branding guidelines and any kind of learnings from that standpoint. And then if possible, there's a developer at times or somebody on the DevOps side who's going to be responsible and working with us on any migrations and things like that. And ultimately, it's a director of marketing or a VP marketing, sometimes even the CMO, who's, I think, the main stakeholder who has like that final sign off and approval on any kind of directions.
Aram, what about the things that are missed often when the website development happens? We spoke with you some time ago, and you mentioned this large enterprise client that we were working with, and the fact that they were setting up their goals not quite the right way, and which was quite fundamental. And then they poured a ton of money and the resources into building the website, which turned out maybe not as they wanted to. What is that goal setting like? What do we need to do there to make sure it's actually reasonable?
Yeah. So with every website redesign, just kind of tagging along on what Ursa already said, there should be always some clear purpose in terms of like, why are we doing a website redesign? Is it because our value proposition and our messaging isn't very clear? So in those cases, it's a copy and content issue around positioning. Is there not enough clarity on what the product does or what it looks like? So it's more than informational. So you maybe need to look at like more visuals. A lot of clients, a lot of end users who are using your product really look at your marketing website as like the first place that is going to be their engagement around it. So like try to really showcase as much of your product as possible so that it answers a lot of maybe their preliminary questions around usability, functionality, what's in it for them, how is it going to save them time, all these other factors. I would say the biggest things that are missed is like goal setting. Like, what is the website doing for you now? What do you want it to do? Like around KPIs or metrics. So there's like the vanity metrics, which is like traffic, where people coming from. Like, well, obviously you always want to have more traffic and search engine placement to be more successful organically. Those are great. Like we could always look at, vanity metrics, but then the real ones are like, if it's like a B2B, for example, like the number of MQLs that are coming to the website, the number of MQLs that convert to SQLs, like sales qualified leads, and then the ones that convert into then opportunities from like a sales standpoint, if it's a B2B product, right? That's offering a SaaS solution.
What was the mistake, Aram? What was the mistake of that client that we were discussing, which we can't mention the name, unfortunately, guys, but it's a large client. What was the mistake? How did they set up that goal? That was it all vanity metric based?
Yeah. So unfortunately, in that specific circumstance, the CMO was really, really focused on vanity metrics because they had a lot of funding, they had a lot of PR initiatives that were tied to it. And those were good. But the problem when you're focusing on vanity metrics around like for example, PR, is that it's not really tied to anything for your real business. Like in a sense, like you got to think about it from a business standpoint, you're driving traffic, but is it the right traffic that you're driving to your site? Because it might not be relevant and might not be converting. When you do like a big funding announcement, okay, you probably have a lot of publications that go and talk about you, but the people going there might be competitors. It could be non-ICP, not ideal client profile related types of users. And so like that doesn't really benefit you as a business owner because it's eyeballs, but is it the relevant eyeballs that you really want, right? And so I think there was a challenge with that one because the CMO was really focused on that and not really focused on like, okay, how do I drive more business or leads to my sales team? How do I know if it's the right type of qualified people coming to the website who are going to be requesting demos? Because at the end of the day, it's wasted time. your sales team is going to be speaking to leads that are not qualified.
Or ignore them, which is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, probably.
After a while. We had also this story, remember we discussed about SEO. And, there's also a project where a client completely disregarded or didn't consider the SEO factor when they were doing migration.
Yeah, so this one, I'll share this story. It's, I think, public knowledge at this point. It wasn't our client, but it was an interesting company that was having a lot of success. It's a startup in Toronto called Logo Joy, which allowed you to go on and create everything from your logos, your brand, your social media assets, all that kind of stuff. And they had tons of organic traffic, tons. And it was like their main driver for a lot of their lead generation. And so what happened was there was a new leader that joined the company who convinced the leadership team to create a new brand. And they changed their brand to a company called Looka. And when that happened, from an SEO standpoint, they didn't properly do a lot of like the redirects and the migrations that would have been required in order to not lose all that SEO juice that they've built over the years. And it was unfortunate because their SEO traffic tanked. People couldn't find them anymore under Logo Joy. And it led to a drop off, and the company had a lot of issues because that was their main source. And they tried paid ads, but it's very expensive. And their cost of acquisition was really great because of SEO. So a lot of companies overlook SEO. It might not be always relevant for every business, but for this one in particular, it was like the number one driver of all like new user acquisition. And so that was like a big mishap, I would say, that the CEO publicly talked about.
Ursula, you had an example of departments not talking to each other, right? So like we work with a large client, the more departments they have, the bigger the website redesign project happens, then these guys don't talk to each other. And what happens? Can you talk a little bit about it?
Without going into the client it's just more so that there are a lot of divisions, and some projects do span across different divisions. So, marketing and SEO. And it's important to have all those people, whether it's like if it's a marketing project, you still need to have all the other divisions at the table right from the start in order to make sure that everything goes off without a hitch. But I think there's like a feeling of product ownership starting in one division, and then it should be siloed to that, but you can't operate a project that way.
So that is also we'll talk about the politics and how do you manage the politics and stakeholders that would tie into that.
Yeah.
Fiona, Aram, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think the challenge becomes with any kind of marketing project, there's always going to be other stakeholders that come and go as well because of promotions, because of resignations or whatever. And the steering committee might, rotate depending on how big the project is, over time. And so the key thing there is just making sure that a lot of the goals for the website are clearly outlined and documented, whether it's like in a product requirements document or some other kind of like business objective place, so that anybody coming to the project would clearly see, okay, what happened? What was the decision made for these goals? What were the learnings up until that point? Why did these things happen, along the way? So there's some like source of truth that people can refer to. But I think it's always important to get everybody involved, especially even somebody on DevOps or engineering, sales teams, customer success teams. Like it'll be good to have one member of that party from different departments, part of the steering committee, so that everybody kind of has line of sight. So then when we start going to copy review or design sign off, sometimes in certain organizations, the head of design or the creative director wants final sign off. And if he's not present along the way in terms of the design process, then unfortunately, it could lead to revisions on the design that have already been approved with other stakeholders along the way. And so on the client side, there should always be somebody who's responsible for taking things back, making sure all these other people have reviewed it and sign off on it before moving forward.
Think about why somebody is a stakeholder. We had that insight when we interview somebody from product, and something surfaced up was like, think about why someone being a stakeholder, one, and second is what is their agenda? Like, because a lot of times you have all these stakeholders, you don't even know why they're a stakeholder. And are they looking for short-term gain? Are they looking for a long-term gain? What are they looking for? Because other than it just becomes incredibly difficult to manage. Now, I wanted to ask you, Fiona, with regards to the politics of the website project, what do you need to do to make sure that there's one person in charge, and then it doesn't happen like a VP or an exec jumps in late in and then changes everything?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that you can do there. Obviously, right from the beginning, when we work with a client, we want to make sure that we understand who's going to be involved, who are the people who get absolute sign off, what sort of, depending on if we're doing a project beginning to end, making sure that, as Aram said, that we have all those appropriate stakeholders from their different departments present at the table. The other piece that's important is, as stakeholders do move in and out of a project, which can happen, if you get a new stakeholder, is taking the time to really onboard them from the beginning. You need to give them the historical piece of that project and where you are, and so that you ensure that everybody's on the same page all of the time. And to keep those open communications, it's a lot easier to move a project along with, especially multiple stakeholders, with good communications and making sure that everybody has all the information they need and we understand why everybody's at the table.
With regards to when we work, or lots of clients or companies work with agencies for all sorts of different reasons, which we will get into. But for example, we had this story where we jumped into a project and a company was already working with the previous agency, and it was difficult. What was that? How did it happen? What was the challenge?
Yeah, sure. So in that specific situation, another agency built out they did the design, they did the implementation on WordPress as the CMS. And so in those situations, what we do is we go in and we audit it to see the way it was done. Is it following best practices, and is it extendable if we were to take it over? It looked good, but then when we actually started working on it, like behind the scenes, we saw that there was like a few kinks there that required us to refactor a few things. And so with any kind of project, if the teams change, there's going to be always a bit of a ramp up period, and also maybe refactoring of certain things if the practices that one agency follows might be different than others. And so like with ours, we always try to, have really high standards. And so we just understand that always leads to better experiences towards the end. And so we try to push everybody, I think, on that same level. And if it requires us to going and reworking a few things to make it better, we would do that. And that's what happened in that case.
Right. The other important thing when we are building the website and doing the whole redesign is making sure that there's a right balance between iteration process and the time required. Like, how do you make that decision? How do you think about that? Ursula, question to you.
So iteration of the website from development to completion, is that what you're referring to?
To production, yes. To production. Something that is shippable.
So to break it down, I would want to break it down to like smaller components of how we build out a site. So we typically build out WordPress websites by blocks, and these blocks are reusable. You can move them around. So I'll just use that as an example of like how we would get that block from design to production. So obviously it goes through the design phase and all the sign off. And then when the designer is ready to hand that over to the developer, obviously comes with a ton of notes of, interactions and that sort of thing. Once the developer is done creating the block, then it goes through a code review. So that's one iteration there. Once the code in the backend looks good, then that block is given back to the designer to review to make sure it visually matches the mocks. Once that is good to go, then the block is given over to one of our QA professionals to make sure that it passes a functionality test. So we're checking that nothing is broken, all the bugs are worked out. And then after that, the block will go through a browser testing. So making sure it works across all browsers and devices. And then finally, once we feel like it's in a good position, the last iteration would be presenting it to the client for user acceptance testing. And that's where we get the final feedback to implement. So it goes through quite a few iterations. And each of those iterations can have a few back and forth. So it's never just one visual QA. Visual QA can be back and forth until you achieve that specific look. So there's no set amount, but that's typically the process.
Where do you feel but like generally speaking, people get hung up on in the process? Where is the stuck in point that doesn't go very smoothly?
I feel like every phase has its own issues, or things that come up. Sometimes when you hand off a designer hands off a mock to a developer will find things that maybe weren't laid out in the design and that they have to address. And then there's some back and forth there. Making sure the code is as clean as possible between the developer and their senior developer, making sure it's, clean. And then also, once we deliver it to the client, sometimes the client might have had a different idea in their head of how it would function or how it would behave. And so we want to meet them where they're at and make sure that it's the correct product that they were expecting. So fun thing about the web and designer and the mocks is like a lot of times mocks don't look exactly to the point how they render on the website. And that's because a website is responsive. It stretches across different screen sizes, and some people are working off of their computers from 1995. Unfortunately, like you can't guarantee that it's always going to be 100% perfect, but it's about achieving as much of the look that was presented in the design mocks. And so UAT is kind of working with the client to bring it to what they were signing on for.
Right. Now, what about the timelines? I know we always talk about, and Aram has very strong opinions around the timelines, because a lot of times when a client comes in or a company comes in, they always want to get it done yesterday, or they want to get it done in 3 weeks, and they are convinced it could be done. And if these guys can't do it, they'll find other guys who can. Of course, it just doesn't happen that way. Now, what is the realistic timeline to get the website? I understand it's a very generic question and so many different factors, but at what point we'll say there's no way we can do it? Like how many weeks or months we need to at least have some kind of a chance?
Is this for me?
Let's start with you, Ursula, and then Aram.
Oh, sure. I think it just depends on the complexity of the site. And I don't think we should, in order to achieve your goal of getting a website out by a certain date means that you have to sacrifice some process, such as like, we don't have time for browser testing, or we don't have time for this, then we don't have time, because those are things that are critical and have to be done. So I would say that's something that would, can be considered like not enough time.
Aram?
Yeah. I think a lot of times people don't really understand what's like a working back schedule of like a website. So with any website initiative, just like very high level points in terms of like steps you need to go through. So obviously the first one is like, what's the objective for the site, right? What are we hoping to achieve? Then there's obviously going to be the content stuff. Do we know what kind of copy we want to have? Is it in a state that, you know, we could build out wireframes around based on some sort of a sitemap that we create? So the sitemap is like also referred to as an information architecture. Like, what is the site going to look like? How many pages is it going to have? And then based off that, do we have copy that could fit into these pages? If we don't have copy, it's kind of difficult then to move forward, because it's important to know that many times copy dictates the design. So the amount of copy you have, the way it's rendered, the way it's presented, the layout structures is kind of critical for us to actually have a good wireframe process.
It's harder, Aram. It is harder, right? It's harder to have a wireframe or design and then try to backfill it with copy.
Yeah, because then you're just going to be changing a lot of things. And it's not like it's like a waterfall process. It could be like iterative, but we need to have the final copy at least at the end of the wireframes or at the start of the high fidelity phase, which is the UI phase, when we're actually then starting to create polished renderings of what, you know, the website is going to look like. Because at that stage is when we're creating assets, whether it's iconography, whether it's stock photography, whether it's custom animations or whatnot. Like, that's where knowing what the copy is kind of critical, because you want the copy to resonate well with that visual illustration next to it that's, you know, being talked about. So just that part alone is a lot of effort, because it depends also, like with SEO, if your business is dependent on SEO or you're moving towards a direction, then you need to keep in mind things like you need to create a short and long tail keyword process and like LSI variations of like, okay, like my business is around this. I want these many type of keywords to be represented on this specific page. That is the focus, right? The product page. Okay, cool. So then we have the keywords that we want to use, and then we got to write copy around those keywords. So like you needed an SEO person and a copywriter typically to do these two things. Once that's kind of done, and like we have templates and things like that, that, you know, our clients use in terms of like putting the copy based off of that, then it's like, okay, like, is it a CTA? Is it, you know, is it going to be linked to something else within the site? Like there's all these other things that need to be considered. I mean, I could keep going, but like, it's just sometimes we have to explain this process in the sense that, okay, like, do you have the copy is one of our first qualifying questions. You know, if they do, okay, great, let's review it. You know, how is it structured? Is there an existing sitemap that's working against this copy that's been created? And then the next question would be like, do you have branding guidelines? Great. Okay. You have branding guidelines. There's maybe an existing style guide and UI kit that we could use. All these things can save time if the client says, okay, we have like a month to launch this new website. It's like, okay, do you have these things? If not, okay, well, like we have to be more realistic then on the timeline. If we want to cut corners, here are the detriments and the cons of this that you need to be aware of from a risk standpoint.
Probably not going to happen 3 weeks though, but
so Sergey, sounds like you really want an answer in time, and inevitably there isn't one.
No, of course. No. And that's totally, I was, you know, that is the reason I'm asking it, is because we get asked these questions all the time, and it's impossible. And it is an impossible answer. Fiona, I actually was going to ask you, and this question from Jose Torrio. Jose, thank you for the question. We'll try to make it as close as we can. Timeline for how much time does it take to develop a bilingual website with 20 landing pages, each language?
So again, you're not going to get an answer from me on time. What we tend to do as an organization is we do discovery with the client. And from there, that's going to dictate the amount of time once we uncover everything. There's other factors in that we need to understand. So what is on those 20 pages? Is it complex? Is there custom work? Are there forms? Are there third-party integrations? If they're basic copy pages, then it's relatively simple. We also need to understand the bilingual aspect to it. So I just worked on building a site for Banfield Pet Hospital, which is also available in Spanish, the entire site on their marketing side of things. And we used a translation service. So it was a third party that actually handled the lift of the translation piece for that. So is that one of the solutions that you want to look for? Because you don't have in-house expertise in bilingual, or do you have people who are not going to be able to continue to create copy in French or Spanish, or whatever language it is. There's other sort of third-party integrations that you can use for the bilingual piece. So yeah,
right.
you're not going to get an answer from me.
No, and that's understandable, and that was my point. Jose, so the best option for us to do is just send us a message, and we can connect and do a discovery call, and then we'll be able to at least have an attempt to give you a reasonable timeline, because it is very difficult, right, without having answers to some of those questions. Now, I want to come back to the question that Aaron asked right at the beginning of this conversation, and it is around high-level scoping for a website. Like, how do you do high-level scoping? What do you need to make sure it includes that you're not missing anything? I'm going to start with Fiona, and then back to Aram. Fiona?
So high-level scoping is something that we do a little bit, I think, before discovery. So we have a call with the client. We get an understanding of what it is that they want to do, the sort of size of the project, some of the intricacies that are going to be involved that we're going to need to consider, get an understanding of sort of the tech stacks that might be involved. And then from there, I mean, we've built 30, 40, 50 different sites. So we can give a high level estimate based on projects that we've done that are on similar. But then after that, we go into discovery and we sit down with the client in a very focused manner with our product designers. Our devs are involved to really understand what is involved in the project build, and then we can give an actual precise estimate at that time.
Right. Just before you jump in, Aram, Jose, thank you for raising your hand. We will get back to you in a few minutes. We'll have this Q&A session. We will answer your question. Just hold on. In a few minutes, we'll get back to it. Aram, back to the scoping question.
Scoping. Yeah. So, based on what Fiona said, one of the things that we try to scope around is if there is a sitemap that's created. So assume there's a sitemap, there's already a clear kind of lay of the land in terms of how many pages are going to exist, how many unique templates are going to exist, or how many unique pages are there going to be. And then based off that, we look at okay, how many unique component blocks are there in this kind of sitemap that we need to consider? And so the way we kind of scope it out is based off these blocks, because they're repeatable. It's scalable. You build it once, you could repurpose it on any other site forward on existing or new pages that you create. So that's really kind of like the way we look at it. So obviously from that standpoint, we try to break out all the blocks into a scoping. It says, okay, how many there are. And then the designers go through, they look at the requirements for each block. And then we created an estimate around each block from a design and from a development standpoint. Depending on the intricacy or the functionality that's needed in each block, it could range. So if it's a simple text block with like a CTA, pretty straightforward. If it's like a 2, 3, 4 column structure block, with maybe an illustration or like animation and stuff like that, it could get more complicated. If it's like a braggy block, like showing the logos of the clients you work with, also, pretty standard. The forms or the way that it connects to the third parties, which is something I want to talk about quickly, is pretty key, because obviously people going on your site, you need to also keep in mind all the tracking that you need to do. So whether or not you use HubSpot, plugins, yes, that's one. Like using for WordPress, we use Yoast SEO. There's a free and a pro one, so that's a great solution. But also, there's integrations with HubSpot, Salesforce. There's like Pardot integration through Salesforce Marketing Cloud integration, the CRM integration. And there's a whole bunch of other third parties. And so there's even tracking software like heat mapping, like Hotjar and a few others. So understanding what type of integrations you want to have on the site, where does the data pass through, are also things that we would scope out in terms of some of the requirements. Now, Aaron also mentioned about web protocols. And
I was going to ask you, and compliance.
Yeah. So there's already a handful of like GDPR kind of solutions out there. There's Admiral as one example. I'm trying to remember the other one. It's slipping my head, but there's a few out there that basically are plug and play GDPR solutions that handle everything from cookies management and all that kind of stuff. And those are best deployed into things like your Google Tag Manager. So your Google Tag Manager basically stores all these different integrations and scripts that you want to have that are trigger or event based, that fire things accordingly into your Google Analytics and things like that. But these are just things you need to keep in mind. In terms of web accessibility, there's the WCAG 2.0 compliance. There's, I think, even 2.1 or 2.2 now. Best rule of thumb is to stick to like AODA compliance AA. Like single A is like the basic, AA is what I recommend for most websites. AAA is, a lot more extensive. So like if you need a AAA accessibility standard, that requires a lot more lift or work effort in terms of actually doing that type of implementation on the development side.
So a lot of steps to go through, but everything is doable. Now, Jose, if you are still here, please raise your hand again. We will get back to you. I'm not quite sure how do we turn on the audio, but I'm sure we'll be able to do it around from your admin panel. And Jose is here. Okay, can we just give Jose a minute to be able so he can answer or ask a question?
Yeah, he should be able to talk now.
Jose, try see if it works. Try to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hey, Jose.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. Well, no, I just dropped this line in there as an example. If this helped to give a timeline, I know Fiona and anyone else, no one is gonna give us a timeline. But just was the idea. Okay, this may take, in the base case scenario, could be, I don't know, 3 months website project or 4 weeks. I don't know. So I only put this as an example. But I don't know what kind of more specific questions you are expecting from me, Sergey.
Oh, yeah. What I meant is, Jose, I mean, as I mentioned, the best option would be to do a discovery call for us to understand more of the type of requirements that you have, because it would be very difficult for us to generalize in the last 15 minutes that we have on this event. But when we actually connect directly, we'll go through some of the checklists that we have, and we'll be able to give you a rough estimate. That will be the best option.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Absolutely. So we'll I'm sure Ali from our team will send you a message, and we'll be able to connect. Now, I wanted to ask Fiona first. Okay, we've done all of this great work. We have shipped the website. Amazing. There's a celebratory party and everything. What do you do after that? Because that's normally not where the process ends. After you put the website out, what do you do after?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's not where it ends. For me, outside of discovery, this is the fun part. It's one of the most interesting parts of the product journey. This is where we get to test it with real users, and we get real data back from our analytics. And we can rely on information coming in from feedback buttons and forms, and input coming into customer service departments. So this is time we get to review all that information, determine whether we've hit this out of the park. And it's also a time where we get to iteratively add new features. We can A/B test functionality. So this is the fun part. This is where you get to make those informed changes that get to result in a really big impact, and continue the process. We monitor for bugs that inevitably pop up. But yeah, this is when the fun starts. It's my favorite part.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, I think what we look for is, before we started working on a new product, so assume the website exists, we try to capture all the metrics of performance at that time. And then along the way, through all the work that we do when we launch it, we're basically comparing and contrasting against what was it like before, what is it now? And like if there were any new KPIs that were created, established, we were tracking those too. The beauty, I think, with a lot of things in the digital world these days is that you can track basically everything on a website in terms of behavior. Sessions can be even recorded of each interaction that takes place on your website. Hotjar, for example, is a great tool for that, where you embed their technology into your site, and you could go in and see every single session of everybody who went on it, what browser they came on, where they're coming from, what exactly they went through the whole site, what did they click on, where did they get stuck maybe, that maybe they thought was a button but wasn't a button. So those are all good inputs for us to like really reconsider. And I think the main one for me that I always like to look at is that, are you getting more qualified and better leads for your business? Like, is this website becoming your main marketing engine for growth? Because in today's time, I think a marketing website is the ultimate reflection of what your business represents at the end of the day. And so you need to make sure that you're hitting on all the main objectives of a website redesign when you're doing it, because this is going to be front and center. Is the first thing that everybody sees and interacts with your business.
Just making sure, and also if you didn't set your goals correctly, which was the vanity metric, for example, like a lot of companies do, then you're probably not going to hit what you need to hit, and that is the conversations. Conversations then turn into leads or potential clients, and that's probably the whole purpose of the website, unless it's some kind of a very unique role or goal that exists. Now, I wanted to also talk a little bit about let's say if somebody decides to go with an agency, and let's say you pick the one that you liked, you did your research online, what kind of guardrails do we need in place for, let's say, communication, project management, or requirements gathering to make sure that you can collaborate with this agency correctly? Ursula, this is for you.
So right off the bat, you want to start off with an SOW, statement of work. This is really important, just to set the foundation of the relationship. And then also it's good to have your detailed estimates visible to the client, and having a weekly tracker so they can see the progress of the work that's being done. They know exactly how many hours are being spent on the project. Also, a very detailed PRD that outlines the scope, but also what is considered out of scope for the project. And then just letting the client know, what happens if an out of scope item does come their way. And then regular communication, and this includes weekly meetings. I think just having a weekly meeting, whether there's a ton on the agenda or not, is just good to have. A shared Slack channel is what we usually use, but whatever you have as like your communication tool, just for like regular daily conversation. Having shared project folders where all the documents live in one place and you can all have access to them without those pesky permissions constantly coming up. And then also just having a list of all the stakeholders on both ends. So you know who to contact, who's responsible for what, and there's just open communication going back and forth.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think when thinking about whether or not you want to do this internally or with an agency, like external partner, just obviously there's some basic common sense kind of things, like, do we have the capabilities in-house to do it? If not, okay, can we work with a partner who could help us with this? If there are internal capabilities, okay, like what are the gaps? Like, what are you missing? Like, if you have designers, great. We love working with other designers in other companies because, we're talking the same language in many ways. And, it's a good experience for everybody because they feel included in the process, and we're sharing everything that we're working on with them, so they feel like a participant. But then if there's no technical person on the project, like there's no CTO or there's no VP of engineering who is one of the stakeholders, then we sometimes even act as that for a lot of our engagements, where we kind of take on that role, and we are obviously doing everything for their best interest. The other thing that is oftentimes not thought about is who on the team internally is going to be maintaining or overseeing the marketing website post-launch. So like you go and you spend this money, you do all this work, but then who's the responsible person who needs to be trained, who needs to be familiar with how everything works, who's actually going to be using this website day to day, right? So with a lot of our clients, some of them have a team of, from 5 to 100 people on the marketing team. And so there needs to be different permissions, and stuff like set up so that they can only access certain things in the CMS, to control the website. Thinking through like those type of things is important, but then also just having kind of clarity in terms of, okay, during handoff, who's going to be taking this over? How do we, support or, engage with the team after the website's launched? I think it's just sometimes missed because like you kind of don't have any follow through in a way.
How do you find a person, let's say internally in the company, you have a few people who could work on the website, but maybe not everybody. How do you know what gaps exist or don't exist? Like who needs to be able to find that, or in the best position to be able to identify the gaps if you maybe can do 30% or 50 or 80% internally?
I would say it comes down to a few things. Is there the skill set that you need in order to do a successful website relaunch? So that's everything from like digital marketing, SEO, copy, design, and engineering typically, and QA obviously. Do people have experience creating and managing websites on your team, or is it their first time? So typically in those situations, it's more about like, let's work with the team so we understand how to do this so that we could do it ourselves. And we provide that training. The other thing is capacity. Even though you have engineers and designers, and other PMs maybe in your company, do they have even the capacity time-wise, mentally, to go and take on another project or not? Because you don't want to overload your existing team working on maybe a new product and getting them sidetracked on this marketing project instead of just working with a partner who could like work alongside, this timeline and, the objectives that are set up.
Yeah, to add on that.
Yes, Fiona.
To add on that, I have a number of times experienced where it's been decided that internal resources could do a project. Those internal resources were not fully allocated and didn't have expertise in the solution that probably should have been used for the type of project. And also because they were working on other products, like their core product, it never gets done. And inevitably the site doesn't get done. And if it does, it goes way beyond cost and it goes way beyond timelines. So I agree with everything that Ram just said, that, if you're looking at building a website internally versus using an agency or even in a hybrid, really look at who do you have available and what is their area of expertise. And
are they actually available?
Are they actually available? Yeah. I mean, you could have a team of engineers that are available, 30%. They're inevitably still going to get sucked into their core product. So that 30% never really is 30%. You also need the other team to fill out, just because you may have a couple engineers, you still need a designer, you still need some sort of product or project or an SME to lead and corral the stakeholders and move the product along. You will need people to test it. You'll need your users as well. You'll need to be able to find users to test it and to validate what you're building. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole team that goes behind building a marketing site. And as a company, you need to decide whether or not you do have this internal expertise and are they really dedicated to the project to get it done when you want it to get done and on time and in budget.
And let's say let's say a client is working, or you found an agency and you're working with an agency, but things do go off track, right? Or maybe the whole website project completely fails. Then if, let's say, we'll just take this assumption that the agency wasn't responsible. I know it's biased, but we'll reverse it in just a moment. So let's say the agency is not responsible and client did something horrible. Ursula, what could that be? When does the project fail or go sideways? Or what goes wrong on this client side, typically?
I think we covered a lot of it, but I think there's a lack of product ownership on the side of the client where everybody wants it done, but nobody's really taking the reins of the product. there's not alignment on the goals of the site. So maybe everyone has a different purpose, and you really just need to be all on the same, track. And again, what Aram said was that like nobody thought who's going to maintain this after it launches, or what's the future of this product, because it does live on after it launches. And I think and the biggest one I think is the lack of communication. So no one's talking to each other. And then, I mean, we keep saying throughout this, like communication, but I honestly think like that's the biggest thing when creating a website, is just having a ton of communication. And it's harder now because we all work from home, most of us, like in the digital sector. So you have to be even better at being on top of communication within your own company and then with the agency.
And now if we were to reverse it, same situation. We know that the client did everything possible that they could. They had it. They had the communication. They had people responsible. The project went sideways or failed because of the agency. What usually goes wrong in that case? Anybody who wants to answer? We'll start with Ursula, and then maybe Aram has a point.
Yeah, but same thing. Communication. They're not being honest about where the project's at, and they're not talking to the client on a weekly basis or letting them know if they're hitting their sprint goals. Resourcing is a big one as well. I think you really want to go with an agency that has permanent full-time staff. If you're going to an agency that relies like mostly on contractors, that just seems a little bit unstable to me. And I would say that's not a good way to go. And then making sure the agency you're going with is familiar with the tech stack. If they've never built a WordPress site, don't hire an agency. That agency, you want to make sure that they have the competence to take this on. And also the experience, like having built a product a few times over is good, because just a lot of lessons learned with experience.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything Ursula said. I think it was fantastically summarized. I would just add, the capacity issue is always a challenge. I think, when an agency is working with a client and we're doing sprint planning, in terms of coming together and aligning out what are the deliverables for the sprint, whether it's a design, creating some new pages that we want to showcase. If for some reason, one freelancer who was hired on the project takes a leave of absence or whatever, or they take on another project which has a higher hourly rate, so they just like jump off ship, you basically kill your entire timeline with that, right? So definitely do the due diligence on any agency that you're working with. Try to go and reach out and speak to the actual team members who are going to be working on your site. That's not something that is quite common, but I highly recommend it. So in any agency, there's always like the A team that comes in and goes and pitches you on this wonderful concept of what your website is going to look like and all this kind of like woohoo. But then who's the actual team building it? Sometimes it's the B team or the C team, or it's an offshore team or whatever. But just being honest and saying, okay, yeah, you know what, even if you have an offshore team, just tell it like, we're using these team members offshore, time zone wise, they can't be available for checkpoints. So there's going to be maybe another project manager who's going to be coming in and handling those calls, but then just be mindful of like the gaps on comms around time zones, frequency of checkpoints and things like that. Word of caution, obviously, is always try to look up some of the team members that are on your project, like where they worked before. Does this agency have the experience in your industry, or be building out B2B or B2C sites as well, depending on your business? Relevance is kind of important because, when you hire a professional agency team, you hope that they're efficient at the same time. There's obviously learnings that the agency needs to do around your specific business, which is just like onboarding time and whatnot. But just making sure that the team members you can speak to early on, get to know them a bit, because you are working with these people on your project, right? So they need to care and they need to have empathy about what you're trying to accomplish. And so from that standpoint, it could save you pain and suffering by just being able to connect with these people on a human level, and like, you're going to be connecting with them weekly, maybe daily in the initial stages of discovery. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. So beyond the portfolio and beautiful designs and the pictures and videos, just speak to people, and the reviews, just speak to the people, and hopefully that the ones that you speak to are aligned to your goals and your synergies and your communication style and your business as well. And you should be in a good shape. Now, we have a few minutes left. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have asked, or something that we have missed in this whole website redesign communication?
Yeah, I mean, so if on my end, maybe I could put up a last message, but is there any other questions from the audience? If you guys have anything, love to answer any questions that you might have.
Fiona, is there anything you wanted to add to the last point we've talked about, or we're good?
No, I think I'm good. I would agree with everything that Ursula and Aram just said in terms of doing your due diligence, do your background check on the agency that you're going to work with. Make sure, it's the small little things when you send over an inquiry that you get a response that's timely and is addresses your questions, and just making sure that they're attentive to you as a client. So yeah, I agree with everything that they've said. And it's a tough market, people are moving and changing, and digital is constantly changing. So it's really important to make sure that when you do align with the client to work with that, they have your best, that they really are trying to do their best for you. That oftentimes that's just their track record, right? You can tell from an agency what sort of clients they've worked with, how long they've been working with those clients. Are they long-term relationships? That says a lot about this sort of environment and the type of people that you want to work with.
Here's how we will wrap up. And this will be the question to everybody. It's a 1 to 2 sentence answer. So for everyone who was on this call, who's going to be watching this video, and they are looking to build a website this year, right? So they're thinking about 2022 website. Maybe they're already in the process. What should they start doing that they maybe haven't been doing or haven't thought about in the next days, weeks, or month to make the website successful? So starting from you, Fiona, and then Aram, and then Ursula, what should they start doing? 1 to 2 sentence answer.
Get the vision of why they want to build the website. If you don't have a vision and an objective, it's hard to tie that to your KPIs. So really understand why you want to redesign your website. And if it's because you saw someone else's and it looked better, that's not usually a good enough reason. So just making sure that you have something in mind that's going to be measurable, that you want to improve, that's going to drive your business goals. So is that conversions? If it is a content marketing site, is it traffic and SEO referrals? So really start to dig down about the purpose behind it and the objectives and what sort of metrics are important that you want to improve to grow your business.
Oh, Fiona, you stole the best one. I don't know what Aram and Ursula is going to do.
So what I would add to that is if you can speak to your customers. So if you're a B2B organization, go and actually speak to your customers. So that could be your product marketing team that does it, your marketing team. Go and actually connect with your clients saying, hey, we're doing a website redesign. What are the biggest pain points that you've come across with our own product that you've been using? And then try to capture that information, use it as intel for when you actually start your discovery process. Now, the other customer that you need to consider is your own organization as well. So if you can, try to do interviews with your stakeholders across different departments to save time in the discovery process when you start working with agencies. So what does that look like? It's speaking to your customer success team, asking them simple questions. What are the most common inquiries that come to you that you want the website to resolve? And then with the sales team, going and speaking to them and saying, what would you hope our new website would communicate that would solve 90% of your sales demos? try to get as specific as you can and try to capture all that information and come up with a game plan in terms of, okay, how are we going to resolve this thing from a copy perspective or from a positioning standpoint? Are our user personas still relevant based on where our company is going? Try to come up with like maybe new user journey flows based off those personas.
Ursula, it wasn't my fault. I asked them 1 or 2 sentence answers, and I don't know if there's anything left.
I think making sure you have the capacity. So, do you have the time for this? It is very time consuming. I think you just need to keep that in mind, that whatever you think it's going to take more. Getting your content together. If this is going to have a bunch of new content, start writing it, start getting, that together, making sure your messages all align. Making sure you have allocated a strong point of contact for this project. I think, resourcing, finding people even within your own company is very difficult to do, and it is a long process. So maybe even getting the ball rolling on that. Yep.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you for attending our second Nail Your Website Redesign in 2022 event. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you found it useful. We will be sharing the recording. We'll share the emails, short clips, and content that summarizes everything we talked about later. You'll get it if you signed up, obviously, and you can look for it on our LinkedIn and all our social channels. That's it.